Good day, colleagues from San Sebastian College, Recoletos, Manila, and Cavite, and Canlubang. Today, we're going to talk about different types of data gathering. And when we speak of different types of data gathering, we cannot help but go back to an initial discussion between the distinction of distinguishing for us quantitative and qualitative research. Many of the data here are not new and they were culled from multiple sources. None of the data that are here are originally mine, as they are from different sources in and literature also. When we start looking at the research process, and here we started really considering the conceptualization stage, and in the conceptualization stage we tried to look into the concept, no? What is the idea? What is the topic that you want to work on? And as we said last time, this is supposedly supported by RRL. It's quite impossible to think or imagine or conceive of a topic that has never been studied before. That's almost weird. So we need to see that certain topics are approached quite differently depending also on the traditions on which the authors are actually coming from. And when I say depending also on the conditions of where the authors are coming from, we need to see also certain changes here. What do we mean by these? What changes am I talking about? Let me stop share for a bit, um, so that I will appear beside my presentation. Oh, uh, see, there. A while ago, we were looking at conceptualization, as I said, and the key term here is the concept. There's an idea, and the idea is what propels us to what we want to study. So if we wanted, for example, to study leadership styles, there are many theories of leadership styles. We can either adopt a particular model of leadership style. In that sense, we will adopt a theoretical framework, or we can create a model of leadership styles by putting together multiple different leadership styles models, which we think are lacking from other models, and therefore we can actually constitute a new framework. In that case, we have a theoretical framework or conceptual framework. So the idea is what you will have to check in relation to the RRL. Now, as we said and emphasized again, the concept cannot actually operate on its own. The concept is actually divided into dimensions, and a particular idea must at least have one or three, at least two in the rules of grammar, but at least three, as we said. But the dimensions, the parts of the concept that you want to study, the rubric, the criteria that you are using to evaluate the concept has to have very clear indicators, no? And the indicators, this is one dimension, has to be subdivided into A, B, C, at least three again, A, B, C, and this is actually, I said, how you basically should construct the instrument for gathering data, whether the instrument is from a theoretical perspective, or whether the instrument is for quantitative or for qualitative research methodology. So you'd see from these initial discussion already that we need to pay attention at these relationship between concept dimensions and indicators. So in the proposals that you submit, can you identify what the concept is? Or once you identify what the concept is, can you identify which dimensions will be involved? And once we identify the dimensions that will be involved, can you also identify the indicators in the process? These are the things you need to pay attention to. No? Wait a minute, my so every concept, a singular concept. So it will change in instances where you're putting together two concepts. So for example, leadership styles. The leadership styles is divided into not dimensions, but typologies, types of leadership styles. But the types of leadership styles will have to be subdivided further into indicators, concrete, specific, um, practical manifestations of the dimensions, and then the dimensions will constitute the concept. It's like a funnel approach, no? For us who are in the academe, this is very much similar to the distinction between a your faculty evaluation, the items there, the dimensions that these indicators measure, and the concepts. So for example, the teacher dresses very well, or the teacher is neat, or the teacher is, these are actually indicators, concrete, specific, practical, experientiable manifestation of a dimension. And what dimension is that? Teacher hygiene, for example. But teacher hygiene is only one dimension of teacher performance, for example. But if you ask, the teacher's voice is loud, or the teacher explains his ideas carefully, profoundly, profoundly, or the teacher writes on the board. These are specific indicators to what dimension? To teaching skill. And then from teaching skill is one dimension of teaching performance. Why do I have to emphasize this? Because when we start looking at quantitative or qualitative research, we operate on the level of the indicator. And when we say we operate on the level of indicators, we need to ask ourselves, is the data that we are talking about, is the data that we are trying to clarify something that is experientiable quantitatively, or experientiable qualitatively? Nevertheless, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, it is experientiable nevertheless. And that's what I have to emphasize here. So there are two very broad methods of doing research, gathering data, no? The first, and when we start talking about gathering data, it needs to be said, the first part is the conceptualization stage. And the conceptualization stage is precisely where we use concepts, dimensions, indicators. It's where we clarify the research questions. It's there where we actually try to see what are the theoretical or the philosophical basis of research. And that's also where we see preferences and skills. So whether it's quantitative or qualitative, the best choice still depends on what answers the questions the best. It's not a question of I just like quanti over quali. No, it cannot be that. It needs to be something more. It needs to be a question of, does these data, or is this data capable of answering the question, or maybe not? So the choice, the determination of the research method will depend largely on the research questions, because there are questions that are naturally inclined to quantitative data. No, like, is there a significant difference? Is there a correlation? These are actually naturally inclined to quantitative data, in contrast um, to questions that have an underlying qualitative data, no? Philosophical questions, theological questions, literature questions that are best answered with descriptions, are actually very clear as early as the underlying philosophical or theoretical, the determination of the underlying philosophical or theoretical basis. That's the reason why I asked you to do RRL, because as you do RRL, as you read other works, and remember, and it's worth emphasizing over and over again, no read, no write. You cannot push forward an idea that you did not read about, nor can you push forward an idea that has very poor theoretical basis. And that's where you also need to consider your preferences. No, for example, I was trained in philosophy. I normally operate quant or qualitatively rather than quantitatively. In linguistics, we use quantitative techniques more than qualitative techniques. But in philosophy, we use more qualitative techniques than quantitative techniques. So it will depend also on your skills. No, are you capable of interviewing, listening to people for a very long period of time? Or are you not capable of doing that? No? What are your preferences? What are your skills? These two are things that we need to pay attention about. So the basic principles of research designs are these. There are four features of research design, which are distinct, but they're actually closely related to each other. And these are the four things we look into. One, ontology. No, ontology, that's very philosophical. Ontologos, no, the being, the study of how you understand everything that exists. So it begs the question how you, the researcher, views the world and the assumptions that you make about the nature of the world and of reality. No? So whether you like it or not, if I'm trained in the positive sciences, my understanding of the world, my assumptions about the nature of the world and of reality will play a very important role in whether I believe that the world is calculable or if the world is describable. Second, epistemology, the assumptions that you make about the best way of investigating the world and about reality. So epistemology has not only something to do with whether we think the world is calculable, but also how we approach the calculable. Or not only because we look at the world as describable, but it's also a question of how do we approach this describability? Are we really able to push forward this describability? So, so these philosophical presuppositions, ontology and epistemology, will have repercussions in terms of methodology, no? And when we say methodology, this has the way that we group together the research techniques in order to present a coherent picture of the whole. No? This also includes our methods and techniques, what you actually do in order to collect your data and also carry your investigations. These two will have something to do with this one, methods and techniques. So these principles will inform us which methods we choose. We need to understand how they fit in the bigger picture of the world and how you choose to investigate it to ensure that the work will be coherent and effective. Please take note, though, that the identification of whether a topic is quantitative or qualitative is really based on more fundamental assumptions. Do we really think that everything in the world is calculable? Or do we really think that everything in the world is describable? These distinctions will play a very important role in the selection of the topic, whether the topic we make is whether the research operationalization, no? So we're done with conceptualization, whether the research operationalization will operate in the quantitative or in the qualitative realm. No? These are two things we need to pay attention to. So when we look at ontology, for example, how we understand reality, you'd see already that we can look at it in terms of realism, internal realism, relativism, and nominalism. These are philosophical presuppositions. No, presuppositions. How do we understand presuppositions? No, I'd say this is how I'll put it very simply. No, there was a time that people said the world is flat, right? But then they said at a certain point, when a ship travels the sea, the eye can only see the eye will see the tip of the ship at a certain point because, and here is the assumption, light is curved. No, the world is flat, but life is the one that's curving. When they discovered that the world is spherical, they now argued that at a certain point you can only see the tip of the mast of the ship. Sorry, you can only see the tip of the mast of the ship because this time light is straight. The world is curved, but light is straight. So in the first example, the world is straight, but light is curved. The assumption there is that light curves. In the second example, that the world has been proven to be spherical, the assumption we take is that light is straight. No, just travel straight. No, so here you see the presuppositions. Now, this presupposition takes multiple phases or characteristics. One is the realist. Second is the internal realist. Third is relativist. And fourth is nominalist. These are philosophical assumptions. So I don't intend to discuss this thoroughly as this is not a philosophy course, but only to make you understand the movement that is happening. So for example, in realism, the world is real and science proceeds by examining and observing it. That's a very realist understanding, that everything is subjected to my gaze, everything I look at. So in that case, there's a single truth, and therefore facts exists, and facts can be uncovered through experiments. That's a very realistic understanding. I'll go to the other end. On the other end, we have the nominalist, nomen, name. Here, reality is simply a construction of people. And therefore, there's no truth external to me. Everything is just a matter of my interpretation. In that realm, then there is no truth. And therefore, facts depends only on the powerful class. No? In this case, male, patriarchy, white, male, and old. Yun yung sinasabi nila. That's how they describe it. White, male, and old. Kaya history, not her story and things like that. But you see also on the note here on the left side that they are on a continuum with overlaps between them. And therefore, it's like one continuum. There's no clearly pure realist. Sometimes they will go to internal realism, or there are no pure nominalists. Sometimes they will even go to the point that they speak of relativism. These are the things that we have to pay attention to. Ontologically, remember there are four: ontological, epistemological, methodological, and the fourth one here is methods and techniques. No? So let's look at the epistemological perspective. Again, the epistemological perspective is the way in which you approach to investigate the world. And there are two main schools here, the positivists, the very scientific world, and the social constructivists. And when we start looking at the positivists, these are people who believe that the best way to investigate the world is through objective methods. That's why we call it positive science. So they see the world as very realist, from a very realist perspective. And because of that, we see a very different approach to reality, also very calculative, very mechanical, and things like that. Uh, this leads us, therefore, to social constructivism also. No? Social constructivism believe that reality does not exist by itself. Instead, it is constructed and given meaning by people. No? These are things you need to pay attention to. No? Uh, so social constructivists, of course, this is a sociological perspective also. No? Believe that reality does not exist apart from the person who experiences reality. Instead, it is constructed and given meaning by people. Their focus is therefore on feelings, beliefs, and thoughts, and how people communicate these. No? And that's the reason why social constructivist belongs more to the relativist realm or to the nominalist realm. Please do not presuppose that because there is a perspective, ontological perspective that is relativist, that is already wrong. Whether you like it or not, there is also a growing paradigm right now, a growing perspective that basically says that everything is perspectival. No, we can be looking at the same truth, but from multiple perspectives. No, that's the reason why it's called multiversity instead of university. No, multiverse of reality. Now, of course, your epistemology, what you understand the world to be, and your ontology will have implications on your methodology. And please take note, it takes time to uncover your epistemological or your ontological bias. And that's the reason why you have to pay attention when other people are talking so that you get to understand, are they epistemological, or are they ontological, or what are they? No? So realists, for example, tend to have a more positivist approach because they tend to gather quantitative sources of data. If it's not numerical, it's not reliable. That's the reason why we look at blood tests. We look into HbA1c, for example, for your 3 months of sugar, no, blood sugar, or we look at your BP. Those are all calculative, numerical, if you will. No. On the other hand, relativists tend to have a social constructivist approach, and therefore they tend to gather qualitative sources of data. And when we start talking about qualitative sources of data, what we're actually talking about are data that are best described, no? Data that are best qualified, no? In medicine, for example, we say if you're in pain from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, what is your level of pain? No? So there's a scale that is provided. But in the relativist constructivist approach, we simply ask you, can you describe what you are feeling? I feel pain. What type of pain? Is it a dull pain? Is it a stabbing pain? So you'd see already, based on that questions alone, that the goal is not really to put a number to a specific experience as it is to be able to describe what the experience is about. Again, no, despite these discussions on methodology, you need to remember that these are not absolutes. People actually look at it as a continuum, like something that's just related to each other, but not totally separated from each other, or a pendulum, one that moves from one end to another. And that's where you see mixed methods and things like that. Also, please do not forget to consider the strength of the researcher. Is the researcher involved in the project, precisely because it's something that is passionate for that person, or is the person detached and uninterested with the topic and things like that? These two we need to pay attention about. Now, please note that quantitative data is about quantities. No? This is about turning everything into numbers. Grades, for example, are numerical. Scores are numerical in nature. While qualitative data, or on the other hand, no? So on the one hand, quantitative data. On the other hand, qualitative data. Sometimes it's nice to emphasize on the one hand, on the other hand, because sometimes we're just used to saying on the other hand, without saying first on the one hand. No, so remember, you only have two hands. But on the other hand, qualitative data is about the nature of the thing investigated, and because it's interested with the nature of the thing being investigated, this is more descriptive, more words rather than numbers. This is the difference between primary and secondary data sources. Okay? There's a difference between the two. Primary data source is the original source from which the inspiration of the original source that you want to look into. Secondary data sources are supportive data sources. No? So be aware of research data management practices and archives of data sets, because there are, so for example, because there are ethical repercussions that are involved there. No? So for example, I was able to gather data from students, but this data will have to be subjected to data privacy laws. And therefore, it has to take into consideration not just the gathering of data, but also the processing of data and the storage of data, no? Or the storing of data, if I may be parallel with how I say. So that being the case, then, your approach may be influenced by your colleague's view. Do not forget that. It can be affected by the discipline from which you come from. Your organization, is the school more quantitative or more qualitative? Your supervisors believes, if or your superiors believe, if your superior is more quantity than quality, their tendency is to do more quantity than quality. And lastly, your own experience. There is no right or wrong answer to choosing your research methods. In fact, the way I look at it, the things that quantitative data is able to do, qualitative data is always also able to do. And the same thing, that anything that qualitative data is able to do, quantitative data is also able to do. The only thing that qualitative data cannot do, which quantitative data can do, is prediction. Qualitative data, and not just prediction, generalization. Sorry, prediction and generalization. Prediction, because you will have to need a statistical test to be able to predict things. And on the other hand, generalization is not possible in qualitative research, precisely because of problems or the limitations of the sampling methodology. So whatever approach you choose for your research, you need to consider always 5 questions. These are the 5 questions that you will have to consider. So whether you do quanti or whether you do quali, take note of these 5 questions. And let's look at these 5 questions one by one. What is the unit of analysis? In answering what is the unit of analysis, we need to ask ourselves, what is the concern of the paper? Is the concern all students? Is the concern some students? Is the concern the entire country? Is the concern the entire college? Or is the concern the individual? These are the things that you need to pay attention to. So unit of analysis, this is the same as answering also this is also a matter of really clarifying the movement. Okay, so what is the unit of analysis that will have to do with sampling? Is it going to be the entire population, or are we going to represent the population by means of sampling? And when we start looking at sampling, not all sampling are generalizable. The random sampling techniques are generalizable because it will necessitate the computation of a minimum sample size. But the non-random sampling cannot be generalizable. Representative, yes, but not generalizable. These are two different things, I think. When it's representative, it can say something about the experience of that group, but whatever the experience is, it's limited to those who spoke about it. Most of the time, the random sampling we utilize for the entire population for quantitative researches, the non-random techniques we utilize for qualitative research. Remember, if it's uh, if it's quantitative research, but you use a non-random sampling, that doesn't only make the research wrong, it makes the entire study almost invalid or of no use because there's no point to do that. Second, so what is the unit of analysis? No, do you know who you are studying and what type of data is available for the people that you are studying? Second, are you relying on universal theory or local knowledge? There, will your results be generalizable, universalizable, and produce universally applicable results? Or do we consider local factors that affect the results, no? And because the inclusion of the local versus universal, no, to a certain extent, if it's universal, that's very quantitative. If it's very local, that's very qualitative, no? But it's not always true that this is the case. It's mostly the case, but not always the case, no? Because it's also possible that you wanted to study something universal, but then you wanted to see also moderating or intervening variables in the local scene that can affect one's understanding of the protocol. See? Next, will theory or data come first? Technically, whatever may happen, you should read literature first. No? Do not think that you are spared. But then also based on literature gaps, you can develop theory or you can gather data that will help inform theory. Nota bene, this will likely be an iterative process. And if it's an iterative process, it's a process that operates pendulum style. And that's something you have to pay attention to, okay? The pendulum style. Will your study be cross-sectional or will the study be longitudinal? Okay? Will the study be cross-sectional or will the study be longitudinal? No? So are we looking at one point in time or over time? You have to pay attention at that because Some wanted to do a 5-year study, but you need to ask yourself, do we have data that are comparable within those 5 years? Because if we don't have comparable data for 5 years, that's going to be very, very problematic. And therefore, something you have to pay attention to. Next, will you verify or falsify a theory? Verification, theory falsification. These are things also that we need to pay attention to. So you cannot conclusively prove any theory at a certain point. So the best that you can do is find nothing that disproves it, or it is therefore easier to formulate a theory that you can try to disprove because you only need one wrong answer to do so. That's a falsification theory. If you remember the falsification theory, that's how it works, no? Falsification theory basically means when you say that all ducks are white, you only need to look for one duck that is not white to be able to identify that to be able to answer the case here. Okay. Uh, just a minute. So choosing the approach, no? Now, let's look at the quantitative research processes. To be able to distinguish it to qualitative research practices. So here, no, in this session, we step back a little bit because last time we jumped almost immediately to quantitative research, talking about statistics, quantifiable data, and things like that. And now we're actually stepping back to clarify, am I really interested in working with quantitative data or qualitative data? No? And we need to pay attention at these distinctions now. Let's look at quantitative approaches and see how it's going to move forward from here. So let's look at now where I ended before I closed my video. First, the quantitative approach attempts to explain phenomena by collecting and analyzing numerical data. The emphasis there is on the numerical data. Second, it tells you if there's a difference, but not necessarily why there is a difference. Third, data collected are always numerical and analyzed using statistical methods, which basically means if you don't know the statistical methods, don't go into this already because this is highly technical. The entire paper can be thrown away precisely because of one error. Like for example, your inability to attain the required sample size that will invalidate everything. Variables are controlled as much as possible. And in this case, the RCD is the gold standard for controlling variables. So we can eliminate interference and measure the effect on any change. Next, randomization is very important to reduce subjective bias. And randomized simply means everybody is given the equal opportunity to be chosen. If there are no numbers involved, certainly it's not quantitative. And again, when we're talking about numbers, we're not just talking about any numbers, so you have to pay attention again at the type of measures that are there, no? And when we start talking about the measures, please take note of nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, no? So this is the type of quantification that is involved there. And some types of research lend themselves better to quantitative approaches than others. And we know that to be a fact. For quantitative data, the data sources should include surveys where there are a large number of respondents, especially if you use a Likert scale or a Likert type scale. Likert scale, this is the scale that is sometimes, always, never, sometimes, seldom, always, never. I'm sorry. Sometimes, always, often, seldom, never. No, there's four. Likert type scale or Likert type scale, and always four because as I told you, we don't actually already go for the 5-point Likert type scale because the lazy respondents will choose the number 3. So in test making, we actually suggest only 4. Second, observations. And here you see, for example, a good example of this one are MMDA staff counting how many cars pass through a particular road, no, and they put sticks there, no, and they code this data into numbers, no. So they turn this data into numbers. Secondary data is also very important, and when we say secondary data, of course we have SATs in the United States, government data, your statistics survey, housing survey are very important, no. I remember I went to a patient last week and there was PSA staff there gathering data, no, going house to house, knocking for the census. No, the census is a secondary data, but also, no, SWS data or other statistical group data, as long as how the data was gathered, the sampling method that was involved are clear and correct, these data can also be used. No? So here you analyze techniques, and the analysis techniques include hypothesis testing. No, that's for experimental research, for quasi-experimental models like causal comparative techniques, from correlations, and even cluster analysis. These are quantitative data. No, so the goal of hypothesis testing is actually falsifiability. No, this is Karl Popper. No, Karl Popper is a philosopher of science, and he says, in a world that's so busy trying to validate every single statement, technically it's endless to do that. So Karl Popper says falsifiability is the better way move forward. For example, if we say all swans are white, no? If you've seen a swan, they're like very huge ducks, very huge ducks, in fact. But when they say, so if we say all swans are white, according to Karl Popper, we only need to look for one swan that is not white in order to falsify the statement. That's what it means. That's why falsifiability or refutability is the inherent possibility that a particular hypothesis, intelligent guess, can be proven false. No? So for Karl Popper, this is not just deductive reasoning, it's very inductive. In fact, one particular instance is enough to falsify a universalized statement. Okay? So there are two types of error also that is involved here quantitatively. Let's just go through them very fast. One, never confuse type 1 and type 2 errors. Just remember that the boy who cried wolf caused both type 1 and type 2 errors. First, what's the type 1 error? everyone believed there was a wolf when there wasn't. That's type 1 error. Type 2 error, they believed that there was no wolf when there was. So these are type 1 and type 2 error. No? First, there's none, but they believed that there was. Type 2, there was, but they didn't believe it. No? Substitute effect for wolf and you're done. No? First, everyone believed there was an effect when there wasn't. Next, they believed there was no effect when there was. No? That's type 1 and type 2. So how do we analyze quantitative data? Again, always good to group and visualize the data initially. And this is where you codify the data. No? Codification doesn't only allow us to assign numerical equivalents to categorical data like gender, socioeconomic status, but also allows us to clean the data. So, and here you'd see the average. We have to describe first the status. That's why descriptive statistics goes first. And that's where we have to talk about measures of central tendency, mean, median, mode. No? And then we have to see whether the curve is skewed or a normal distribution. What are the range? What are the variance? What are the standard deviation? These are the things that anybody who's doing quantitative research should be familiar with. So trying to find the signal from the noise, that's what happens here. Generally, either a difference or a correlation. That's quantitative research. No? In quantitative research, you wanted to see relationships or differences, just the two. No? So choosing the right test will also matter. No? Parametric versus non-parametric measures. Remember t-test and ANOVA for test of differences, or Pearson product moment correlation for correlation. That's parametric versus non-parametric. Mann-Whitney U test, Kruskal-Wallis W test, or chi-square. These are non-parametric measures for correlation. No? But also take note, correlation, because it's a test of relationship, does not always imply causation. It's not because they're related that one is the cause of the other. These are two different things. These are examples of correlation from the spurious correlation site. Very interesting how they're related. Here you can see examples. I'll not go through them anymore because this is just a review, supposedly. And then we interpret. And when we interpret, we look at the significance level at 0.05 or 0.010. Normally 0.05, this is correct. The p-value, the probability of getting a value of the test statistics as extreme or more extreme than that observed by chance alone. Power, the ability to detect a difference if there is one. Effect, numerical way of expressing the strength or magnitude of a reported relationship, be it casual relationships or not. These are things to pay attention to also. So these are examples, and this is how it's interpreted. I will just go through them. You can pause this recording if you want. So what do quantitative researchers worry about? They ask, is my sample size representative of the population? Have I used the correct statistical test? Have I reduced the likelihood of making type 1 or type 2 types of error? Are my results generalizable to the entire population? Are my results methods reproducible? Am I measuring things the right way? These are things that quantitative researchers worry about. And what's wrong with quantitative research? Some things can't be measured or measured accurately. Love, for example. Also, quantitative research doesn't tell you why. So if you're interested why this happened, they cannot tell you. No? It can be very impersonal also. That's why they use third-person references, the researcher, he, she, like that. No engagements with human behaviors here. So data is also static because there are snapshots of a point in time. And this can tell a version of the truth or a lie. No? So lies, damn lies, and statistics, these are things we have to pay attention to also. There. So this is my discussion for quantitative research. I hope that you are more or less clear if you really want to do quantitative research or not. If you have any questions, the questions can be raised at this point. If none, I'll just pause the recording a bit because I wanted to use the restroom a bit, and then I'll come back for the succeeding sections. You won't feel this pause because I'll just pause it. Let's continue looking at the qualitative approaches. Here in qualitative researches, we take into consideration researches that doesn't involve numerical data. Instead of numbers, it uses words, pictures, photos, videos, audio recordings, field notes, generalities, or even people's own words. They tend to start with a broad question rather than a specific hypothesis. And they develop theory rather than start with one. And therefore, if the quantitative research is more deductive than inductive, here it's more inductive than deductive. How do we gather qualitative data? Here we tend to yield rich data because the interest of the researcher is not simply to report what happened, but to explore how and why things happen. So it doesn't need very large sample sizes in comparison to quantitative research, but only representative ones, and that's the difference here. The other one is it needs a sample that's generalizable, not a sample that's not generalizable. No, so some issues that may arise here involves respondents providing inaccurate or false information, or simply saying what they think the researcher wants to hear. This is very dangerous. Ethical issues may be must be observed more clearly, precisely because in this case, the researcher is closer to the participants. It's even part of the participants at some moments. And therefore, researcher objectivity may be more difficult to achieve. No, participant observation, for example, as a data gathering technique, is something we have to pay attention to. What are the different sources of data here? Interviews, structured, semi-structured, unstructured interviews. Normally, we don't suggest an unstructured interview, even a semi-structured one. It's very difficult to process data that is open-ended. In the same way that in a questionnaire, we do not suggest that you simply put "and others" or simply allow the researcher to simply write anything. That's very difficult. Focus group discussion, questionnaires or surveys. These are qualitative data, but still, no, you have to be able to understand how is it qualitative data, questionnaires and surveys. Secondary data, this will include diaries, self-reporting, written accounts of past events, archival data, company reports, direct observations, video or audio, and even ethnography. How do we analyze qualitative data? There are a lot of analyses, no? Content analysis, grounded analysis, social network analysis, discourse analysis, narrative analysis, and conversation analysis are just a few examples. Of course, the most famous one, which you can use not just in qualitative data, but also in quantitative data, is thematic analysis, where the presentation of your findings will follow the organization of the statement of the problem. No? And this is the reason why, for those who are doing researches, their chapter 2, which is the review of related literature, and chapter 4, the presentation of findings, are actually alike. They really look alike. And the difference is in the RRL, it's a generic presentation of the themes. The chapter 4 is really the specific, no, the specific ones. No? So this is an example of qualitative research, no, comparing two types of audio, personal-led and technology-led. Uh, and this is the data analysis, so you can take into consideration the comparison of the two different walks. The thematic analysis, that's what I was saying and has been teaching you since time immemorial. And then findings, lessons learned, recommendations. So what do qualitative researchers worry about? They ask whether they have coded their data correctly. They ask whether they captured the situation in a realistic way. They describe the context is insufficient detail. They ask whether they have managed to see the world through the eyes of the participants, or whether the approach is flexible or able to change. What's wrong with qualitative research? It can be very subjective. It can't always be repeated over and over again. It can't always be generalizable. It can't always give you definite answers in the way that quantitative researchers can. And it can be easy to carry out or easy to hide bad qualitative research rather than bad quantitative research. So other aspects of design that we need to take into consideration when you design your research: validity, reliability, and trustworthiness. No? Validity, dependability, showing that the findings are consistent and could be repeated. That's dependability. Confirmability, the degree of neutrality or the extent to which the findings of a study are shaped by the respondents and not the researcher's bias, motivation, or interest. Credibility, the confidence in reporting the truth of the findings. Transferability, showing that the findings have applicability in other contexts. These are things to pay attention to. Okay. So in general, this is a good table from Franken and Wallen, how to design and evaluate research in education. So quantitative methodologies, preference for precise hypotheses stated at the outset, qualitative preference for hypotheses that emerge as study develops. See, the developing story, ganun dito sa quanti, dito tapos na sa quanti, sa quali, still going on. Preference for precise definition, preference for definition in context or study progresses. You would see that my perspective of research, though I encourage you to do qualitative, the demands of quantitative is what I'm asking you. No? So I've asked you to define based on the literature as early as possible. Data reduced to numerical scores here, date preference for the narrative descriptions, much attention to assessing and improving reliability of scores, preference for assuming the reliability of inferences. So here, very deductive, general to specific. Here, very inductive, specific to general. Assessment of validity through a variety of procedures, reliance on statistical indices. On the other hand, the triangulation, there has to be three sources of data, each corroborating for each other. And that's also worth emphasizing there. When we say triangulation, it's not that you have three data sets. One to answer problem one, another interview problem number one, survey problem number two, KII problem number three. No, that's not triangulation. Triangulation is problem number one, document analysis. That three should be in each of the statements of the problem. Questionnaire, interview, document analysis, problem number one. Problem number two, questionnaire, interview, document analysis. Problem, it has to be three at all time. That's what triangulation means. No, not having three different data sets for three problems. No. Preference for random techniques for obtaining meaningful samples. Preference for expert samples. Here, purposive sampling. Here, random sampling, the sampling size that I'm talking about. Here, the preference for describing procedures. Here, for narrative descriptions of procedures is there too. Here, preference for design, statistical control of extraneous variables. Here, logical analysis in controlling and accounting for extraneous variables. Here, preference for procedural bias. Here, reliance on the researcher to deal with the procedural bias. Here, the design is the one that will address the bias. Here, the researcher is the one that will address the bias. Here, preference for statistical summary results. Here, preference for narrative summary of results. Preference for breaking down complex phenomena to specific parts. Here, preference for holistic description of complex phenomena. Again, this deductive and inductive. We will see that hopefully by March, how inductive and deductive are addressed. Here, willingness to manipulate aspects, situations, or conditions. Here, unwillingness to tamper with naturally occurring phenomena. So this is the distinction between quantitative and qualitative research techniques and methodologies. So, but in the advent that you wanted to put together quali-quanti, you'll end up with the mixed method. This is a style that uses procedures for conducting research that are typically applied, that typically applies both quantitative and qualitative study. So the mixed method determines the choice of a design. For example, using survey to identify a specific group of students and conducting focus group with them to understand their views. That's a mixed method. A series of interviews are conducted to ascertain the critical issues bothering students and a survey of the student body using these issues as variables. So that's also still a mixed method. Please take note, in mixed method, when you use quanti-quali, the rigors demanded by quantitative research and the rigor demanded by qualitative research needs to be taken into consideration. So 3 types of designs. So the priority is given to either the quantitative or qualitative data collection. The sequence of collecting quantitative or qualitative data should be actually be very clear. Is quanti the base before quali, or is it quali data the base before quanti? So which is which? So there are 3 common designs normally. The quali-quanti model, the exploratory mixed method designs. Here, qualitative data are collected first and more heavily weighted. The quanti-quali model is the another explanatory. So the other one is exploratory. The second one, qual model, is the explanatory mixed method design. Quantitative data are collected first and more heavily weighed in. And then the quanti-quali model, this is the triangulation mixed method design. Quantitative and qualitative are collected concurrently and weighted equally. This is the type of mixed method design that I encourage you to take into consideration. I think that's it for this mixed method design. These are the sources and the links that you might find very important for your consideration. Thank you very much for attending and listening to this lecture. And in the next schedule, we'll try to look at coding in the coding and processing qualitative research processes. Thank you very much and have a nice day, everyone.